Okay, let's go. Number 10. Cueva de los Tallos. In July 1974, Scottish civil engineer Stan Hall formally proposed to the governments of Ecuador and the United Kingdom a joint scientific expedition into the limestone cave network of the Cordillera del Cóndor in southeastern Ecuador, a system of passages that British and Ecuadorian speleologists had explored in fragments since the mid-1960s without producing comprehensive biological, geological, or archaeological documentation. Hall spent the following 3 years coordinating institutional support across 2 national governments, arranging military logistics with the Ecuadorian and British armed forces, and assembling more than 100 participants. Professional speleologists, botanists, zoologists, archaeologists, geologists, a documentary film crew, and serving military personnel from both countries. The expedition's stated scientific objectives were biological documentation, archaeological survey, and systematic flora and fauna cataloging. What Hall and his participants expected to find was what the existing survey literature suggested: a large cave system with unusual acoustic and thermal properties, possible pre-Columbian artifacts, and a rich, potentially undocumented deep ecosystem. They were not looking for anything that did not already fit within the established categories of natural science. On August 3, 1976, the core team descended into the cave. Beyond a hall lined with metal tablets, in a sealed side passage that the expedition's field notes designated Passage 7C, they found 3 sets of biological remains. Each being stands approximately 10 feet tall. The skull of each measures 24 inches in vertical length, nearly twice the vertical dimension of an adult human cranium, and structurally unlike any cranium in the vertebrate fossil record at any geological period. The lower cranium does not terminate in a mandible. It bifurcates. 2 independently hinged lateral plates anchor to the skull base by double pivot joints, a configuration present in no vertebrate anatomy, living or fossil, across any geological period documented by science. Each plate is capable of independent movement without reference to the other. The facial midline below the orbital region presents no nasal aperture, no oral structure, no mental protuberance. There is no jaw in any recognizable anatomical sense. Whatever these organisms processed from their environment, they did not process it through a face. The beings have 4 arms. The upper pair is significantly longer than the lower, extending to a total reach roughly equivalent to the organism's full standing height of 10 feet, so that when the upper limbs rest at the organism's sides, their termini reach the ground. The lower pair is positioned at approximately hip level in the organism's frame. The spinal column does not describe a single vertical axis. It curves through 3 separate horizontal planes: a lateral sweep at the cervical region, a counterlateral sweep at the thoracic region, and a rearward bow at the lumbar equivalent. 3 distinct deviations, each sustained across the column's full length, each occupying a different plane. The biomechanical result is a posture with no precedent in the vertebrate fossil record on any continent at any geological period. These beings did not stand the way anything from Earth stands. Their spinal architecture does not permit it. 3 beings of this anatomy were present in a single sealed passage. That is not a singular anomaly. A group implies a reason to be there. Whatever brought 3 organisms of this anatomy to the eastern slope of the Cordillera del Cóndor, sealed inside from the interior, the official scientific record has proposed no account of it. Pino Turola, an independent field researcher who served as the expedition's biological documentation specialist, extracted tissue samples from the preserved remains and conducted preliminary cellular analysis using the field laboratory equipment the expedition carried for biological survey. The cellular structures he documented did not correspond to animal architecture, plant architecture, fungal architecture, or protist architecture, the 4 domains that collectively account for every organism classified in the history of biological science, living or extinct, across every lineage documented since the founding of systematic taxonomy. Not a domain mismatch, not a classification anomaly requiring further study. No domain at all. Turola transported the samples toward Quito for independent laboratory analysis. Ecuadorian border officials, acting under direct orders from the Ministry of National Defense, confiscated the samples before they reached any independent facility. No analysis of those specific samples outside Ecuadorian government custody has been conducted or publicly disclosed since. Passage 7C had been sealed from the interior. An interlocking channel and bar mechanism designed to engage only from inside the passage is documented in photographs taken during the 1976 expedition. Those photographs have been held in a classified archive maintained by the Ecuadorian Ministry of Defense since August 1976 and have not been released under any public records request filed since 1984. What the mechanism was designed to secure, or to contain, or to prevent from being opened has not entered the public record. Neil Armstrong, commander of Apollo 11 and the first human being to walk on the surface of another world, served as the expedition's honorary president. He had no prior record of involvement in archaeological fieldwork and offered no public explanation for his participation. He descended into the cave with the core team on August 3rd. He published no observations from the descent. He gave no interviews regarding the cave's interior. In the 15 years preceding what would become his only recorded statement on the site, Armstrong had consistently declined to apply unqualified superlatives to the accomplishments of the Apollo program itself. In 1991, in a documented conversation with Swiss author and journalist Erich von Daniken, Armstrong described Cueva de los Tallos as the most significant archaeological site in the world. He did not elaborate. He did not address the site again before his death in August 2012. The Ecuadorian military established a permanent exclusion perimeter around the cave entrance within 3 days of the expedition's surface return. That perimeter remains in effect. Torroa's field notes were submitted to the Ecuadorian Ministry of Natural Resources as a condition of the expedition's operating permit and were classified upon receipt. British expedition participants signed non-disclosure agreements as a condition of their exit visas from Ecuador. Stan Hall submitted comprehensive survey documentation to the expedition's government sponsors in 1977 Cana. The portions of the record pertaining to Passage 7C were returned to him under seal. He died in 2008 without publishing a complete account of the descent. The record Armstrong left is one sentence. Number 9. Lalton Cave. In March 1930, Eduardo Noguera, an archaeologist with the Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia, arrived at the Loltun cave system in the Yucatan Peninsula with a standard research mandate: extend the prior survey of the cave's Mayan pictograph galleries and catalog the Pleistocene mammal deposits in its lower galleries' mammoth remains, ancient bison, extinct feline species that earlier expeditions had partially documented but never systematically recorded. The work was routine. Noguera expected to spend several weeks cross-referencing stratigraphic layers with existing field records. In the rear of a lower gallery, his team broke through a calcite formation and found a sealed inner chamber that does not appear in any INAH publication from that year or any year since. The mummified being recovered from that chamber stands approximately 9 feet tall. Its skeletal structure matches no vertebrate in the known fossil or living record at any taxonomic level, not at the kingdom level, not at the phylum level, not at the class or order level. At no level at which biological classification provides a framework for comparison does any known organism correspond to what the Loltun chamber contained. The skeletal geometry is distinct from every lineage of vertebrate evolution documented across every geological period for which a fossil record exists. It is not a variant or extreme expression of known biology. It is not an early or divergent branch of any documented evolutionary tree. It is a distinct anatomical architecture that the terrestrial record does not account for. The rib cage is the first irreducibly impossible feature. Every vertebrate with a thoracic cage across the full span of vertebrate evolution, from the earliest Devonian fish through every living mammal, presents ribs in parallel vertical pairs, each pair stacked at approximately the same rotational orientation as the pair below it. The rib cage of the Loltun being has 26 pairs of ribs. No known mammal has more than 12. No known vertebrate, living or extinct, has more than 24 rib pairs across the combined cervical and thoracic regions. But the number of pairs is not the primary anomaly. Each successive pair is rotated approximately 14 degrees relative to the pair below it, producing not a parallel stack but a continuous helical twist, a spiral lattice of bone that turns from the base of the thoracic structure to its apex, each successive layer adding angular displacement to the one below it. The chest cavity enclosed by that lattice does not expand in the uniform cylindrical manner of any known thoracic structure. It spirals. The geometry has no functional analog in any documented biology, no evolutionary precursor in any geological period, and no mechanical explanation derivable from any known anatomical principle governing vertebrate body plans. The lower face terminates not in a mandible, but in a fused bony plate, continuous with the anterior skull, bearing two symmetrical apertures approximately 1.2 inches in diameter each, positioned slightly below where a nasal bridge would sit in any known primate. There is no jaw hinge. There is no dental structure of any kind. There is no temporomandibular joint, no pterygoid process, no coronoid notch. The entire anatomical vocabulary of vertebrate jaw mechanics is absent from this skull at the level of bone structure. Each hand has 7 digits. Each digit has 4 knuckle joints, one more than the 3-joint arrangement universal across all known primate and most mammalian hand anatomy. The additional joint is positioned between what would be the proximal and middle phalanx in a human finger. Because all 4 joints across all 7 digits are independently mobile, the hand's total range of angular motion cannot be described as a scaled variant of any known manipulator. It is a categorically different mechanism, capable of spatial configurations no known vertebrate hand can produce. The preservation state of the mummified tissue was sufficient to permit isotopic analysis of the organic material. The nitrogen isotope ratios present in the tissue samples are incompatible with Earth's nitrogen cycle. Every organism that has ever lived on this planet participates in that cycle directly, through the consumption of nitrogen-fixing bacteria and compounds, or indirectly, through the consumption of organisms that consume them. The cycle produces a defined range of nitrogen isotope signatures, and every known terrestrial organism falls within that range without exception, because there is no other nitrogen source available within Earth's biosphere. No dietary adaptation, no metabolic specialization, no extreme terrestrial environment produces a nitrogen isotope signature outside that range. The boundary is not a statistical tendency. It is a hard biochemical constraint imposed by the planet's own chemistry. The nitrogen ratios from the lolton being fall outside that range entirely. The organism did not consume anything that exists in Earth's food chain at any trophic level. The nitrogen compounds in its tissue did not originate from any source within Earth's biosphere. The isotopic signature does not indicate a variant of terrestrial biology. It does not suggest an organism that adapted to unusual dietary conditions within a known biosphere. It indicates an organism that built its body from compounds that do not and cannot exist in Earth's biosphere, which means the being did not originate in it. The INAH field report records this finding in 5 lines and then terminates without conclusion. Those 5 lines are the only surviving official documentation of the chamber's contents. A handwritten field addendum filed separately from the main report discovered in the INAH archive in Mexico City by IN. Researcher Alfonso Morales in 1997 describes the chamber in 11 lines before breaking off mid-sentence. The document is undated. The remaining pages have not been located. A federal sealing order was issued for the chamber's access point within 6 weeks of the initial discovery on record at the INAH Legal Department, citing only structural instability as its justification and keeping the passage inaccessible to any non-governmental researcher since 1930. The mummified being was removed before the passage was sealed. The field addendum references its transport to Mexico City under military escort. No inventory record, storage log, or subsequent reference to the being exists in any Mexican federal archive that has been made available to researchers. The primary documentation has never entered public record. Number 8. Tassili and Azure Inner Cave. In June 1974, Henry Lotte, the French ethnologist, whose 1956 survey of the Tassili and Azure Plateau in southeastern Algeria had produced the most complete documentation of its painted galleries ever assembled, cataloging more than 800 distinct painted panels across the sandstone formations, findings he published in his 1959 volume, The Search for the Tassili Frescoes. Returned to the site leading a second expedition funded jointly by the Institut de Paléontologie Humaine in Paris and the Algerian Ministry of Culture, with the stated objective of producing higher-resolution photographic documentation of the figure paintings already catalogued in his earlier work. He was not looking for anything new. He was completing a record. Behind the main painted gallery, Lotte's team found a sealed inner passage blocked by a stone panel. Thermal imaging conducted at the site confirmed the panel had been placed from inside. On the other side were the physical remains of beings whose scale and anatomical form matched the painted figures covering the gallery walls directly outside a correspondence that established, in the moment of its discovery, that the paintings were not symbolic representations, not ceremonial imagery, not mythology. They were records drawn from direct observation. Each being stands approximately 13 feet tall, more than twice the standing height of an adult human, and outside the size range of every known hominid at any geological period. The skeletal proportions do not represent enlarged human anatomy. The shoulder-to-hip ratio, the limb-to-trunk ratio, and the cranial volume relative to total body height each diverge from every known vertebrate scaling relationship at every size class. The arm bones are subdivided by a third hinge joint positioned below the elbow, between what would be the distal forearm and the wrist in any known vertebrate. This joint has no anatomical analog anywhere in the vertebrate record, living or extinct, at any taxonomic classification. In vertebrate anatomy, the forearm is a two-bone structure, the radius and ulna capable of rotation along its long axis, but constrained to a single plane of flexion. The additional joint in these beings permits the forearm to articulate in two independent planes simultaneously, bending laterally as well as anteriorly and producing a range of motion that no musculoskeletal system in the biological record can approximate, model, count for evolutionarily. Each hand bears 9 digits. No vertebrate lineage at any geological period mammalian, reptilian, amphibian, or any proposed transitional form in the fossil record has generated a 9-digit hand structure. The digit count, the third hinge joint, and the full limb proportions constitute an anatomical profile with no placement in any known biological taxonomy. The soft tissue of the beings had partially preserved in a sealed Saharan desert passage, at temperatures routinely exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit during summer months, across a minimum span of 8,000 years because a compound permeating the tissue prevented its decomposition by a mechanism that resists all known biochemical analysis. No known decay inhibitor produces preservation of soft organic tissue at those temperatures over any time scale. Lote's expedition chemist designated the compound T74 in field notes and characterized it systematically. It is not resin, it is not mineral salt, it is not any petroleum derivative, it is not any biological secretion present in the scientific literature at any taxonomic level. The compound's mechanism of action does not correspond to any documented chemistry. The volume present in the tissue samples is consistent with deliberate external application across the full surface area of each body. Lote's field notes record a final observation on the compound. T74 was not secreted by the organisms and was not deposited by any environmental process. It was applied deliberately, systematically, before the passage was sealed. The painted figures at Tassili Najar, documented in Lote's 1956 expedition and present in published literature on prehistoric Saharan rock art for decades, categorized by mainstream archaeology as ceremonial or shamanistic imagery, depict beings at the same scale as the remains in the passage. Identical height, identical extended upper limb geometry consistent with the third hinge joint, identical proportions at the shoulder and upper arm. The figures in the paintings match the remains precisely, at life scale, in the same location. Whoever painted those walls was not depicting mythology. They were depicting the beings in the passage, from direct observation. The Tassili Najar galleries are the most extensive visual record of a non-human species in the archaeological record, and they have been categorized as prehistoric art for 60 years. The stone panel covering the passage entrance bears tool marks on its interior face only. There are no tool marks on the exterior surface. The panel was placed, cut to fit, and set from inside the passage by whatever sealed it. Geological survey confirmed the passage has no secondary access of any kind, no shaft, no fissure, no crack in the sandstone formation large enough to permit egress beyond the sealed entrance. Whatever sealed the passage entered through the entrance, placed the panel behind itself from inside, and did not leave. The preserved beings account for what was found in the passage. They do not account for what closed the door. Lote recorded the discovery in his field journal on June 19, 1974, with the notation Passage Fermi Continu Extraordinaire. His entry for June 20th describes the beginning of systematic photographic documentation. His entry for June 21st states that the Algerian Ministry of Culture representative attached to the expedition had radioed Algiers. There are no further field journal entries from Tassili Najar. The journal's next entry is dated July 4, 1974, from Paris. Algerian military personnel arrived at the site within 48 hours of the June 21st communication. The inner passage was sealed with reinforced concrete, a material visually inconsistent with the surrounding sandstone, and still visible to any visitor who reaches that gallery section within 5 days of the military's arrival. No removal request, access petition, or formal archaeological appeal has been filed with the Algerian Ministry of Culture or any international heritage authority in the 5 decades since. Lot's field notes covering the inner passage discovery disappeared from the Institut de Paléontologie Humaine Archive in Paris by the following year. An inventory conducted in 1975 by Institute librarian Marie-Claire Desroches confirmed their absence. Lot published no account of the inner passage in any forum before his death in 1991. If you have watched this far and have not subscribed, do that now and like the video. It takes 2 seconds, and it reaches the people who are looking for exactly this material. Next, a sealed chamber beneath a Mesoamerican ceremonial complex where the beings had no eyes at all, an 270-degree crystalline plate spanning their skulls where their faces should have been. Whatever those structures were sensing, it was not light. The concrete is still there. Number 7. The Mitla Sealed Chambers. In October 1901, INAH archaeologist Alfonso Caso completed a formal excavation report on a set of sealed subchambers discovered beneath the Hall of Columns at the Zapataque ceremonial complex at Mitla in present-day Oaxaca, a document the INAH Directorate in Mexico City immediately classified under the designation Materials, Sensibles, Sensitive Materials, where it has remained for 124 years without declassification. Caso had arrived at Mitla with a conventional archaeological assignment: to document Zapotec funerary practice at one of the civilization's most significant sacred sites. Mitla had functioned for centuries as the primary mortuary and religious center of Zapotec civilization. The site the Zapotec called Lioba the place of the dead, and the assignment asked him to catalog what the dead had left behind. The subchambers were not his discovery. They had been entered once before, in 1533. By Spanish colonial surveyors conducting administrative inventory of the Zapotec complex for the Viceroy of New Spain, and their account survives in a 4-page document held in the Archivo General de Indias in Seville, last reviewed by academic researcher Francisco de la Maza of the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico in 1961. The document's final page is damaged and partially illegible. What remains of it describes, in the clinical vocabulary of colonial administrative record, 7 beings whose form the surveyors stated explicitly was not human. No de hombre ni de bestia ni de criatura alguna conocida de Dios. Not of man, not of beast, not of any creature known to God. Each of the 7 beings has no ocular structure of any kind. There are no eye sockets. There is no orbital cavity. There is no optic nerve channel in the skull. The bone of the facial region is continuous and uninterrupted across the area where any known vertebrate skull presents bilateral orbital openings, the hollow recesses that accommodate the eye, the optic nerve, and the lacrimal apparatus through which any sighted organism converts light into biological signal. Vision was not degraded in these organisms. It was not vestigial. It was absent at the architectural level of the skull itself, with no known evolutionary pathway, not among vertebrates. Not at any point in the fossil record across any known lineage by which bilateral pause, orbital cavities present in ancestral forms simply cease to exist in a descendant. Orbital sockets are load-bearing structural elements of the vertebrate skull, present across every branch of the vertebrate tree, present in the earliest transitional forms between aquatic and terrestrial life, present in lineages that had not yet developed complex photoreception. The skull does not arrive at this configuration from anything that has ever lived on this planet. In the position occupied by the facial structure in any known vertebrate from the brow ridge downward across the nasal and orbital region, the beings instead possess a cranial plate spanning 270 degrees of the skull's upper dome. The plate is not bone. Its surface is composed of a network of crystallized mineral channels, each approximately 0.3 of an inch in diameter, branching in fractal patterns across the plate's full surface area. Spectroscopic analysis conducted during Caso's 1901 excavation identified the crystalline material as a silicon-germanium compound, a semiconductor. a material whose electrical conductivity can be precisely modulated present in no natural geological deposit in the Oaxacan region, or as far as the analysis team could determine, anywhere in Mexico. Silicon germanium in crystallized lattice form, embedded in a biological structure, has no precedent in any documented organism. The channels connect at nodes corresponding to a network geometry optimized for the reception of electromagnetic signals. The frequency range to which that geometry would be sensitive falls entirely outside the range of human perception. Whatever the 270-degree plate was detecting, it was not visible light, not acoustic vibration, and not any signal the human nervous system registers as sensation. Each being has 4 upper limbs of equal length, positioned symmetrically around the upper torso. There are no lower limbs. The pelvic structure is present vestigially, in a compressed and simplified form, but it articulates with nothing below it. The skeletal geometry of the upper limbs does not show the bone density or joint configuration characteristic of weight-bearing locomotion. The pelvis shows no evidence of surface abrasion consistent with being dragged. Casso's internal report noted that the locomotion question cannot be resolved from the anatomical evidence available and offered no hypothesis. Each being measures between 11 and 14 feet in length. A body plan with 4 symmetrically distributed upper limbs and no lower limbs does not occur in the vertebrate fossil record at any geological period, at any scale, in any known phylum. The 7 beings were found not in a single chamber, but in a set of connected subchambers, each individual in a distinct sealed compartment, linked by internal passages, a spatial arrangement that implies deliberate positioning. Cranial sensory plates of this type, functioning as electromagnetic receivers, would collectively span a broad range of incoming signal frequencies. 7 of them, in proximity, in a networked underground structure, constitute a receiving array. An arrangement optimized not for individual sensation, but for coordinated collective detection. The spectroscopic analysis does not resolve whether the function was receptive or generative, whether signals were being gathered or produced. What it establishes is that these were not 7 isolated individuals sharing a space. They were 7 components of a system. The system was underground, and it was sealed from the inside. The 2022 Geophysical Survey, conducted under Project Liaba, a collaboration between INAH, the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, and the ARX project, using ground-penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, and seismic noise tomography, confirmed the presence of subsurface voids directly beneath the Church of San Pablo Apostol, which Spanish missionaries constructed atop the ceremonial complex in the 16th century. The Project Liaba team's published interpretation attributed the voids to conventional Zapotec mortuary architecture. The survey was not authorized to open them. As of 2025, no independent scientific analysis of the subchamber contents has been conducted outside of Casso's classified 1901 report. The spectroscopic analysis of the cranial plate material was removed from the INAH publication processed by INA Director Francisco del Paso y Troncoso personally in October 1901, according to a note preserved in the INAH archives correspondence files. The note gives no reason. The subchambers were resealed with concrete following Casso's excavation. The internal report records all 7 beings as left in situ. Casso published extensively on Zapotec archaeology throughout the remainder of his career. He published nothing on the subchambers. The standing orders of October 1901 have never been rescinded. Number 6. Wonderwork Cave, lower level. Wonderwork Cave in South Africa's Northern Cape Province is one of the most extensively documented archaeological sites on the continent. The location where Francesco Berna of Boston University and his co-authors established, in a 2012 paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, the earliest confirmed evidence of controlled fire use by hominins dated to approximately 1 million years before present. Berna's team had spent years constructing the evidentiary case for that finding. It stood on methodological grounds solid enough to anchor the site's place in the published literature for decades. What was found in a sealed lower level beneath that documented fire layer was not mentioned in that paper, or in any paper published since. In August 2013, a 7-member research team from the University of the Witwatersrand School of Geosciences arrived at Wonderwork under an excavation permit issued by the South African National Heritage Resources Authority. Their stated objective: documented in the permit application, was the chronological extension of the fire use evidence layer already cataloged in the cave's upper strata standard consolidation work, the kind that follows a major published finding and builds its evidentiary base outward without altering its conclusions. The lower level was not in their excavation plan. Nothing in the published literature on Wonderwork Cave indicated it was there. The entity recovered from that lower level is bipedal. It stands 15 feet tall. Its spinal column contains 47 vertebrae. The human spine contains 33 vertebral elements. The largest count documented in any known great ape is 34. No known vertebrate in the 550 million year fossil record of complex animal life exceeds that figure across the cervical and thoracic regions combined. The 14 additional vertebrae in this entity's column are not concentrated in any single anatomical region. They are distributed across the full length of the spine, each element slightly larger than its human equivalent, each separated by an intervertebral disc of substantially greater thickness than any documented in the mammalian record, producing a fully articulated assembly capable of independent lateral and anterior-posterior flexion at each of its 46 joints simultaneously. The biomechanical consequence of a 15-foot bipedal frame built around 46 independent flexion points along a single spinal column has no evaluative framework in any published branch of vertebrate anatomy. No model exists for what that structure would permit an organism to do. The entity has no auditory structure. There are no external ear formations of any kind. There is no ear canal. There are no auditory ossicles, the three small bones present in the middle ear of every known mammal, without exception, across 200 million years of fossil record, the evolutionary inheritance connecting mammalian hearing to the jaw mechanics of ancestral reptile lineages. The skull presents no auditory bulla, no tympanic membrane attachment point, no stapedial artery channel, no cochlear chamber, no semicircular canal architecture. Every structural component of the vertebrate auditory system is absent. Not vestigial, not displaced to a secondary cranial position, absent at the architectural level of the skull itself. Hearing, as a sensory modality documented in every vertebrate class with fossil representation, was structurally impossible for this entity. In the anatomical positions where auditory and visual sensory structures appear in every known vertebrate, this entity instead carries a complex arrangement of crystalline mineral deposits embedded in the organic tissue of the jawline and orbital ridge. An internal report produced by the Witwatersrand excavation team following recovery describes these formations as possibly a biological receiver or transmitter of electromagnetic signals at frequencies outside the human sensory range. The formations are not bone. They are not cartilage. They are not any biological secretion documented in the scientific literature at any taxonomic level. Among the crystalline compounds identified in the report's analytical section is barium titanate, a ceramic material manufactured specifically for use in piezoelectric sensors, devices that convert mechanical vibration into electrical signal or electrical input into mechanical output, present in this entity's mandibular and orbital tissue in a configuration the report's authors describe as architecturally non-random. Barium titanate does not appear in any biological survey, any fossil record, or any biochemical literature in any scientific tradition. It is a manufactured industrial compound. It was present in a biological organism. It was not secreted. It was not deposited by any geological or environmental process. The crystalline deposits are oriented. Each cluster along the jawline and orbital ridge points in a consistent direction relative to the entity's body, axis the anatomical signature that distinguishes a functioning directional array from a random mineral accumulation, identical at the structural level to the characteristics separating a receiving antenna from background scatter. An organism built without hearing, carrying no known alternative acoustic sensory structure, and growing oriented barium titanate arrays in its facial tissue is not a variant of terrestrial biology at any taxonomic level. Whether the array was receptive or generative, whether the entity received signals or produced them, the internal report does not resolve. What it establishes is that the array is pointed. Something occupies the direction it faces. The entity was built to maintain a relationship with it. On August 14, 2013, the sealed sediment layer was identified as anomalous during routine core sampling at a depth the team's excavation plan had not projected. On August 17th, the team penetrated the sealed layer. The South African National Heritage Resources Authority was notified by the team's lead researcher the same day. Authority representatives arrived at the site on August 19th. The team had been below the sealed layer for 48 hours. The excavation was suspended, and the team was removed from the site that afternoon. The NHRA sealed the lower level on September 2, 2013, citing site integrity concerns. The internal report, 22 pages, including the analytical chemistry section documenting the barium titanate identification, was submitted to the NHRA as a condition of the excavation permit and was not returned to the Witwatersrand researchers. In March 2014, Dr. Relebohile Makona, a geoscience lecturer in the Witwatersrand School of Geosciences and a member of the excavation team, transmitted 6 of the report's 22 pages through an intermediary to an archived geology discussion forum. Dr. Makona's institutional profile at the University of the Witwatersrand, her full publication record, her departmental page, and her faculty contact listing was removed from the university's servers within 2 weeks of that posting. She has not appeared in any affiliated institution's faculty or research records since. The 6-page partial remains accessible in archived forum records. The remaining 16 pages have not been disclosed. The 16 missing pages of the internal report are not lost. Let me say one thing, and I won't bring it up again. All 50 places like this one are now one book, The Sealed Vault. Yours to keep, easy to gift, and the best way to support this channel. Links below. Let's get back to the video. Number 5. Naka Crystal Cave. On February 19, 2017, Penelope Boston, director of NASA Astrobiology Institute and a researcher whose 2 decades at the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology had been spent cataloging microbial life in geological formations. On 3 continents descended approximately 980 feet beneath the Nika mine in Chihuahua, Mexico, into a chamber where air temperatures reach 136 degrees Fahrenheit and the humidity is near total, and extracted living material from fluid inclusions sealed inside the cave's selenite crystals for a minimum of 50,000 years. Her stated objective was unremarkable: extend an existing line of research into microbial dormancy in geological formations, using the Nika crystals as an unusually ancient test case for documented dormancy limits. The organisms her team revived are not a member of any domain of life that exists or has ever existed on this planet. Their DNA backbone does not use phosphorus. Phosphorus is one of 6 elements: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, constituting the universal biochemical foundation of all known life. Every organism in every domain of terrestrial life, every bacterium, every archaeon, every eukaryote cataloged in 3 centuries of taxonomy uses phosphorus as a structural component of its nucleic acid chains without exception. The Nika organisms substitute arsenic. A 2010 paper by researchers affiliated with NASA Astrobiology program, published in Science, proposed this substitution as a theoretical biochemical possibility before it was retracted under sustained peer criticism and formally reclassified as biologically non-viable. The Nika organisms do not register the retraction. Their genetic architecture is built from materials that every established biochemical constraint identifies as incompatible with life as Earth has produced it. Their cell membranes extend the deviation to a second independent biological system. Bacterial cell membranes use ester-linked fatty acid lipid compounds. Archaeal membranes use ether-linked isoprenoid compounds, distinct from bacterial architecture at the molecular level. Eukaryotic membranes use a third structural class. These 3 classes and all their documented variants constitute the complete inventory of membrane architecture in the biological record every organism science has named, cataloged, or sequenced across every known domain of life. The Nika organisms' membranes use lipid compounds outside all 3 classes. Compounds present in no organism in the full taxonomy of known life, synthesized in no documented terrestrial biochemical pathway, produced by no geological or chemical process indigenous to this planet. Boston's team characterized them as structurally unprecedented in the internal report drafted before the December 2017 classification. An organism whose cell membrane is assembled from compounds that Earth's biochemistry has never generated did not assemble that membrane inside Earth's biochemistry. When cultured and allowed to grow, the organisms did not distribute randomly through the culture medium the baseline behavior of every known microorganism under every documented culture condition. They arranged themselves into geometric formations, precisely replicating the internal crystal structure of the Cueva de las Cristales at a ratio of 1 to 10,000, producing across the surface of the culture medium a physical structure corresponding to every major selenite formation in the cave. The spatial arrangement of the cave's columns, the angles of their terminal faces, the positional relationships between crystal clusters across the cave's full three-dimensional floor plan, all of it reproduced at microscopic scale. Not approximately. Each organism occupied a position corresponding to a specific structural feature of a physical space from which they had been sealed for 50,000 years. Every organism in the culture contributed to the formation simultaneously. The geometry was not noise. It was not emergent pattern. It was the cave. No microorganism has ever been observed to possess spatial awareness beyond its immediate cellular environment. No mechanism in microbiology, genetics, or information theory accounts for how single-celled organisms coordinate the replication of a protee, the replication of a three-dimensional geometric structure, across a culture medium at a 10,000 to 1 scale. No mechanism accounts for how those organisms retained, across 50,000 years of crystalline suspension with no metabolic activity, any spatial template of an environment sealed from them during the Pleistocene. 3 separate impossibilities present simultaneously in a single culture. A mechanism for spatial memory within a single cell, which no cellular structure in the biological record has been shown to support, a mechanism for transmitting structural data between individual cells without chemical signaling of any documented kind, and a mechanism for coordinating thousands of individual organisms into a precise simultaneous spatial arrangement the moment metabolic activity resumes. Biology has no framework for any one of them. What those organisms retained across 50,000 years is not genetic information in any known sense. It is structural, spatial, architectural. The template they reproduced does not encode ancestry or biological function. It encodes place a specific physical location inside a specific geological formation at a specific moment in planetary time, before the last glacial maximum, before anatomically modern humans reached the Western Hemisphere. The organisms do not know where they are. They know where they were. Whatever physical substrate within those organisms carries that template, and whatever mechanism communicates it simultaneously to every cell in the culture at the moment of revival, Boston's internal report does not resolve. It records the behavior. It cannot account for it. Boston presented a partial account of her findings at the American Geophysical Union Fall Meeting in New Orleans on December 13, 2017, describing the organism's revival and their biochemical novelty, without disclosing the geometric self-organization behavior observed in culture. NASA issued a press statement the following week characterizing the organisms as potentially novel and noting that complete findings were pending peer review. NASA Office of the Administrator classified the full internal report before the end of that month. As of 2025, no peer-reviewed paper on the complete findings has appeared in any scientific journal, and no independent research team has been granted access to the original specimens. The Cueva de las Cristales was first entered in April 2000 when miners Juan and Pedro Sanchez drilled through into the chamber while excavating a new access tunnel. Its selenite formations reach 36 feet in length, the largest natural crystals ever documented on Earth. In March 2018, 3 months after NASA classified Boston's complete report, Industrias Penols terminated the pumping operation that had kept the cave accessible since its discovery. The cave reflooded over a period of weeks. Reversal would require a multi-year extraction effort that Industrias Penols has not authorized and has not discussed publicly. Penelope Boston has not addressed the complete findings of the NICA extraction project in any public forum since December 2017. The report is classified. The cave is sealed. Number 4. The Sigiriya Inner Citadel Sublevel. On March 11, 1982, a 4-person team from Sri Lanka's Central Cultural Fund, led by archaeologist Senaka Bandaranayake, descended into a sublevel beneath the western gallery of the Sigiriya rock fortress, a 5th-century royal complex built on a volcanic plug rising 600 feet above the surrounding jungle, one of the most extensively documented archaeological sites in South Asia to conduct routine structural surveys of the citadel's foundations. They were mapping load-bearing stone configurations. They were not searching for a sealed passage. They were not expecting one. What they found, in a chamber beneath a site that had been academically catalogued for more than a century, was an entity and a collection of objects that were removed from the record within weeks of their discovery. The entity does not have bilateral symmetry. Every organism in the vertebrate fossil record, every mammal, every bird, every reptile, every fish, every known hominid across the full span of geological time is organized around a bilateral axis. A left side and a right side mirrored across a central plane with a defined front, a defined back, a head, and a tail. The entity at Sigiriya is organized radially. 5 limb extensions radiate from a central body mass at equal angular intervals of 72 degrees, each positioned with geometric precision around the organism's full circumference. There is no front, there is no back, there is no preferred direction of orientation. The body plan resembles the organizational architecture of Canoderm sea urchins, brittle stars, but it has never appeared in the fossil record in any organism of this complexity, this size, or this apparent functional sophistication in any environment, on any continent, at any point in geological history. Each of the 5 limbs terminates in a cluster of 12 manipulator digits, not fused, not vestigial, not structurally simplified. Each digit is capable of independent flexion across multiple planes simultaneously. The overall architecture of each limb terminus is consistent, in functional terms, with a structure optimized for fine manipulation at scales down to 1/25th of an inch, resolution finer than that achievable by any known primate hand. Each of the 5 limbs is structurally identical to the others. There are no locomotor limbs and no manipulator limbs. Every extension serves the same function. Every extension is capable of the same precision. Whatever this organism did, it did it equally in all 5 directions at once. The entity measures approximately 8 feet across its radial span and 6 feet in vertical height. At the crown of the central body mass, where a skull and cranial vault would be located in any known vertebrate, there is no skull. There is no cranium. What occupies that position is a ring of 16 sensory pits arranged at intervals of precisely 22.5 degrees geometric regularity in biological tissue that implies developmental mechanisms with no analog in any known embryology. Each pit measures 0.8 inches in diameter. There is no variation in the angular spacing between any 2 adjacent pits. The interior surface of each pit is lined with a dense crystalline compound identified by the Institute of Fundamental Studies in Kandy in its April 1982 and 1982 analysis, as a silicon-based material not produced by any known biological process and not occurring in any geological formation in the surrounding rock. The 16 pits, arranged in an unbroken complete circle, provide simultaneous sensory coverage across the full 360-degree field around the organism. The entity had no blind spot. Whatever it was registering, it registered from every direction, at every moment, with equal fidelity. Alongside the entity, arranged with evident order within the sublevel, were geometric metal alloy objects ranging in their longest dimension from 2 inches to 14 inches. Their surfaces bear machining marks at tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch tolerances, not achievable by any documented human metallurgical process at any point in the historical record, including the present. Elemental analysis conducted by the Institute of Fundamental Studies in April 1982 returned a composition containing iridium and osmium in isotopic ratios that do not occur naturally in Earth's crust and are not consistent with any known human metallurgical process, extractive technique, or synthetic alloying procedure at any period in the documented history of materials science. Iridium and osmium are the densest naturally occurring elements on Earth. They are vanishingly rare in the accessible crust because they are siderophilic. They preferentially bonded with iron during planetary formation and migrated into Earth's core more than 4 billion years ago, leaving only trace residues in surface geology. The isotopic ratios in the Sigiriya objects are not a variant of those crustal traces. They are not from Earth's crust. They are not from Earth. The entity is not a relic or a representation. It is a body, the desiccated remains of an organism lying beneath a site that humans later built a royal fortress directly on top of, in a sealed sublevel for which the builders above left no evidence of awareness. The Sigiriya citadel was constructed in the late 5th century CE under King Kassapa I. The degree of compaction in the sublevel's sealed sediment layer and the extent of calcification along the passage walls place its closure at a minimum of 2,000 years before the citadel's construction. Whatever deposited those objects alongside that body was at Sigiriya more than 2 millennia before Kassapa the first quarried the first stone for his palace on the rock above it. Bandaranayake's field log entry for March 11th describes the entity and the objects in 11 lines. The radial limb structure, the sensory ring, the metal objects, their arrangement in the chamber. His entry for March 12th is missing. There are no field log entries for March 13th through the 18th. His log resumes on March 19th, dated from Colombo. The Central Cultural Fund sealed sublevel access within 3 weeks of the initial penetration. The Institute of Fundamental Studies' metallurgical findings, the iridium-osmium isotopic analysis, the machining tolerance documentation were withdrawn from 2 pending publications by the CCF Directorate, the Journal of Archaeological Science and the Sri Lanka Journal of the Humanities. Withdrawal notices are on file at both journals. The CCF issued a standing prohibition on sublevel access in April 1982. Every subsequent CCF Directorate has renewed it. The entity's present location does not appear in any public record. 3 Freedom of Information requests filed by University of Kelaniya researchers between 2001 and 2009 were denied on national security grounds. If you have watched this far, subscribe and hit like. This series goes further from here, not less. What comes next is not about what was found. It is about what was still there when researchers broke through the wall, an entity that had arranged thousands of human remains into a precise geometric pattern and then locked itself inside from the interior, using a mechanism that cannot be operated from outside the chamber. National security does not apply to archaeology. Number 3. The Basilica of San Francisco Catacombs. On October 23, 1969, a contracted construction crew descended to the lowest accessible level of the catacomb network beneath the Basilica of San Francisco in Lima to extend a drainage channel. The network had been formally established around 1600 and held, by the Franciscan Order's own accounting, the remains of approximately 25,000 individuals interred across 2 centuries of colonial burial. The crew's work order was specific and unremarkable. Lay new drainage infrastructure in the catacomb's deepest section, widen an existing channel, return to surface. They were not archaeologists. They were not conducting an excavation. The lower level had been mapped and accessed before, and the Franciscan Order's own records showed no uncharted subchamber at that depth. There was no reason to expect anything. They broke through a sealed stone wall. The wall had been sealed from the interior. Inside the subchamber, among thousands of human remains arranged in configurations that no construction worker, present that day, ever agreed to describe in any voluntarily produced written statement, lay a single entity measuring approximately 4 feet in its compressed resting position and approximately 7 feet in its full curled length. Its body tapers to a solid point at one end. At that terminal point, dense cortical bone, structurally consistent with the shaft terminus of a large long bone, there is no head. There is no cranium. There is no facial structure of any kind. There is no anatomical attachment point for a cervical column. No nervous tissue clusters at that terminus. The pointed end is the organism's natural terminus, not a truncation, not a deformity, not a consequence of damage. 500 million years of complex animal evolution on this planet has produced no organism built this way. This one was. The broad end is the functional anterior. 14 limbs extend from the lateral surfaces of that region, arranged in 7 bilateral pairs at regular intervals along the body's length. Each limb terminates in 3 long, flexible digits, with a joint architecture permitting fine manipulation at scales below 1/25 of an inch. 14 limbs with 3 digits each places this organism outside every recognized phylum in the fossil and living record. No vertebrate exceeds 4 limbs. Arthropods, the only phylum with higher appendage counts, reach a maximum of 10, and no arthropod in the paleontological record has developed digit BI-SAS, flexibility approaching the range of motion documented in the Franciscan Order's internal report. This organism is not a variant of any known biology. It is a different kind of thing entirely. Along the full length of the dorsal surface runs a ridge of calcified protrusions. Dorsal ridges appear in several vertebrate lineages, in stegosaurid dinosaurs, in certain extinct reptilian lines, in particular fish species. They always occur with minor irregularities, small deviations in spacing, slight asymmetries in protrusion height, the accumulated imprecision of any organic tissue grown under real biological conditions, subject to metabolic variability, to mechanical loading, to the normal noise of development. The Lima entity's dorsal ridge has none of those irregularities. The spacing between successive protrusions, measured from photographic documentation produced at the site and subjected to mathematical analysis following the entity's removal, follows a Fibonacci sequence without deviation, each successive interval equaling the sum of the two immediately preceding intervals, from the first protrusion to the last, across the full dorsal length. Fibonacci proportions appear throughout biology, in shell growth, in phyllotaxis, in the branching geometry of vascular systems. They appear, without exception, imperfectly. The ridge was not grown. It was manufactured. The internal structure was documented in the Franciscan Order's internal report, completed on site before the entity's removal and constituting the only systematic anatomical record created before it disappeared from any verifiable location. 3 identifiable structures are present. First, a dense central neural mass, approximately the size of a basketball, occupying the widest region of the body. Second, a network of filamentous channels extending from that mass to each of the 14 limb termini and to each protrusion of the dorsal ridge, connecting the neural center to every peripheral structure the organism possessed, in a configuration indicating that each limb terminus and each dorsal protrusion functioned as a node of a single centralized nervous apparatus. Third, 12 sealed internal cavities distributed symmetrically through the body's interior, whose contents and function the report does not characterize. No digestive organs are identifiable by any anatomical framework. No reproductive structures. No respiratory system, no lung analog, no tracheal channel, no diaphragm equivalent. The organism sustained itself by no metabolic process present in any known biology. The subchamber's entrance had been sealed from the interior. The locking assembly consists of 2 stone pivot mechanisms anchored in opposing walls, positioned 11 feet apart. The mechanism holds its sealed state only when both pivots are rotated simultaneously. A single individual standing between the 2 pivots cannot reach both at once. The distance exceeds the functional reach of any known organism. The mechanism requires either 2 individuals operating in coordination, or 1 individual whose effective lateral reach span equals or exceeds 11 feet. When the entity's 14 limbs are fully extended, their combined lateral span is 11 feet and 4 inches. The correspondence 11 feet of required span, 11 feet and 4 inches of available span is not approximate. It sealed itself inside alone. The Franciscan superior of the basilica arrived within 3 hours of the wall's penetration. That afternoon he contacted the Vatican Apostolic Nunciature in Lima. A nunciature representative arrived on October 24th. The entity was removed within 24 hours of its discovery by a nunciature team, not by any Peruvian government authority, not by any archaeological institution. Construction workers were interviewed individually by Franciscan administrators on October 25th. None subsequently made any public statement. The subchamber was sealed with concrete on October 26, 1969, 3 days after the wall's penetration, 2 days after the entity's removal. No Peruvian government agency was notified. No archaeological body was consulted. The thousands of human remains inside, arranged in configurations that the Franciscan Superior's internal memorandum, recovered from the Lima archive in 2004 by researcher Julio Espejo of the Pontificia Universidad Católica del Perú, describes as not random and not Christian, remains sealed behind that concrete. The entity's location has never been disclosed. No Vatican communication referencing it has been released. Number 2. The Palenque Secondary Chamber. On the morning of June 15, 1952, Alberto Rasluillier, the Mexican-French archaeologist affiliated with the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, who had spent the preceding 4 excavation seasons removing compacted debris from a sealed staircase discovered beneath the floor of the Temple of the Inscriptions at Palenque. Chiapas descended to the base of that staircase, cleared the final section of fill blocking a stone door, and entered the primary burial chamber of the Maya ruler Kayanish Janab Pakal. He was there to complete the documentation of a royal Maya tomb. The staircase alone had required 4 years to clear. Behind Pakal's sarcophagus, through an opening in the chamber's rear wall, was a secondary room that had never been referenced in any INAH communication, that does not appear in any published account L'Huillier produced during his lifetime, and that was documented in a set of photographs made the following morning, June 16, 1952, which circulated briefly among senior Mexican archaeologists, before the Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia recalled every distributed copy. The 6 beings in that secondary chamber stand approximately 7 feet tall. That measurement does not convey the departure they represent. In a human adult, the skull accounts for between 12 and 13% of total standing height Adiacac, proportion consistent across the entire genus Homo and every documented great ape species. In the 6 beings at Palenque, the skull comprises nearly 40% of total body height. This is not a skull that is large. The posterior of the cranium extends significantly beyond any known hominid cranial geometry. The frontal region, the structure associated with the forward expansion that marked the evolutionary trajectory of human encephalization, is reduced rather than projected. The skull profile that results is the structural inverse of the form produced by human brain development. A different architecture, distributing volume toward the posterior and superior surface in proportions that imply different internal organization, different functional priorities, and no derivation from any skull in the terrestrial record. There is no nasal structure on any of the 6 beings, no nasal bones, no attachment surface for nasal cartilage, no apertures in the facial midline. The bone of the midface runs continuous and unbroken from the inferior margin of the orbital rim to the lip line, a solid, featureless plate occupying the position where every known vertebrate skull, across every vertebrate lineage on record, presents bilateral respiratory openings. Whatever exchange these beings conducted with their environment, the architecture of the face forecloses every respiratory mechanism available in terrestrial biology. The lower limbs of each being are fused below the knee, not 2 shafts brought together by trauma, not a developmental pathology leaving a detectable seam between adjacent bones. A single anatomical unit with no internal boundary, no joint line, no developmental record of separate origin, a structure that widens through the calf and tapers to a smooth, rounded terminus. There are no feet, there are no toes. The end of the lower body is structurally identical to the proximal shaft of a long bone. It terminates. It was not designed to interface with a surface. The thoracic cage of each being widens continuously from the shoulder girdle to the inferior rib margin, reaching its greatest lateral extent at the base of the chest, the precise anatomical inverse of the human thorax, which narrows as it descends from the shoulder. At its widest point, the chest expands to approximately twice the width of the shoulder structure. No documented vertebrate thorax is organized in this direction. The musculature required to operate a body on these structural principles, limbs anchored at a narrow superior attachment, suspended from a thorax that doubles in width as it descends, has no functional analog in any organism in the living or fossil record. 3 of the 6 beings were found in fitted coverings made from a metal alloy. They are not textile garments. They are rigid, contoured structures shaped to the specific external geometry of each individual body, fabricated to tolerances of thousandths of an inch individual fabrication for each wearer. Not a shared template. Elemental analysis of the alloy returned iridium and osmium isotope ratios absent from every known geological deposit in Mexico, from every known source on the North or South American continent, and from every documented human metallurgical process at any period. The isotopic profile is identical to the alloy identified in the sealed sublevel at Siberia, Sri Lanka, the same ratios, the same surface manufacturing signatures, the same non-terrestrial elemental composition across a separation of more than 10,000 miles. The Sigiriya objects and the Palenque coverings were produced from the same material by the same process. The coverings fit the beings exactly. They were made for them. The Temple of the Inscriptions was constructed specifically to enclose Pakal's primary burial chamber. The secondary chamber adjoins that primary space directly, sharing the tomb's structural walls, accessed through an opening in the primary chamber's rear wall. Whatever spatial relationship was established between the 2 chambers between the Maya ruler's body and whatever occupied that secondary room was considered important enough to build a limestone pyramid around it. 6 beings in individually fabricated non-terrestrial coverings were placed in deliberate, permanent proximity to the most elaborately prepared royal burial in the Maya archaeological record. L'Huilier's field notes from June 15th and 16th are held in the INAH archive under a classification, category established in 1953 that does not appear in any public-facing INAH documentation system. The photographs from June 16th were developed in Mexico City and copies distributed to approximately 12 senior archaeologists and university faculty. Commissioner Ignacio Marquina issued a formal recall order for all distributed copies in a memorandum dated September 4, 1952, 10 weeks after the photographs were made. The secondary chamber was sealed with poured concrete in March 1953, before the Temple of the Inscriptions opened to public access and before L'Huilier's formal account of the primary burial discovery was published. That sealing does not appear in his account. 3 of the recalled photographs surfaced in Mexico City academic circles during the 1960s, before disappearing again. Historian Manuel Torres at the Universidad Autónoma de Chiapas documented the recall memorandum and the March 1953 concrete sealing in Cochrane. In the journal Estudios Mesoamericanos, the only peer-reviewed publication to acknowledge the secondary chamber's existence. No researcher has been granted access since. The recall memorandum is dated September 4, 1952, and gives no reason. Number 1. KV-17. On October 16, 1817, Giovanni Battista Belzoni, the Italian explorer and engineer who had been excavating in the Valley of the Kings under a firman issued by the Pasha of Egypt, Muhammad Ali broke through the blocked entrance to the tomb designated KVA 17 in the Bibon el Amalek and spent 3 days documenting its decorated chambers, producing a published account in 1820 that described the tomb in precise detail and made no mention of a sealed inner room. In October 1974, archival researcher Patricia Usick of the British Museum's Department of Egyptian Antiquities, working through the personal papers of William Banks, the British antiquarian and patron whose estate had entered the museum's collection upon Bane. His death in 1855 found an unsent letter from Belzoni describing a chamber accessed 2 days after KV-17's initial entry, located behind a false wall in the lower corridor. The letter was reclassified immediately under Museum Access Code R74/12 and has not been made available to any external researcher since. Belzoni's language is unembellished. He describes objects of a form I cannot account for, disposed with evident intention, and, in the paragraph following, the preserved form of a great being with limbs multiplied and arranged as no living thing I have seen, measuring from its head to where its form terminates perhaps 16 feet. In a subsequent passage he adds, "Not the 4 of any beast, nor the 2 of any man, but many and symmetrically disposed." The being Belzoni described does not have sides. Every vertebrate organism in the complete fossil record, every fish, every amphibian, every reptile, every mammal, across 500 million years of evolutionary history, presents 2 or 4 limbs organized on a bilateral axis, a left side and a right side mirroring each other along a central plane. The being in KV-17 has neither. Many and symmetrically disposed describes one specific architectural condition. Identical structural elements placed at equal angular intervals around a central mass, with no preferred directional axis, no left, no right, no bilateral pairing of any kind. That architecture is radial symmetry, the body plan in which extensions radiate from a central point at regular angular spacing, with no front, no back, and no bilateral axis in any skeletal sense. The being in KV-17 does not belong to any recognized vertebrate body plan. It has no representative in any vertebrate lineage at any point in the geological record. Belzoni was not describing an organism with anomalous bilateral anatomy. He was describing an organism built on a fundamentally different architectural principle from every vertebrate he had encountered: human bodies, animal bodies, and every mummified organism he had examined across 4 years of Egyptian fieldwork. The form fell entirely outside the taxonomic reference system available to him. He describes the being's preservation as comparable to the finest mummies he had examined anywhere in Egypt, calibrated professional standard from someone who had physically handled more mummified tissue than virtually any European alive. The tissue was present, the form was complete, the features were legible. KV-17 is the tomb of Seti I, who ruled Egypt from approximately 1290 BCE to 1279 BCE, and whose monument is the longest, deepest, and most elaborately decorated tomb in the Valley of the Kings' 450 feet of descending corridor, 10 chambers, and a vaulted burial hall whose painted ceiling constitutes the most complete astronomical map surviving from the ancient world. The sealed inner room Belzoni found is positioned beneath the primary burial shaft, cut deeper into the bedrock than any documented feature of the tomb's architectural plan. The geological context of the passage and its blocking mechanism places its original pawn ceiling at a minimum of several centuries before Seti I's architects began excavation. They did not create that room. They found it. The tomb's design was arranged around it. The most elaborate funerary monument in the ancient Egyptian record was built as its roof, and the most important royal burial of the 19th dynasty was placed in the chamber directly above. The body plan radial limb distribution. No bilateral axis. A central mass with symmetrically disposed extensions is structurally identical to the entity documented by Sri Lanka's Central Cultural Fund in the sealed sublevel beneath the Sigiriya Inner Citadel in March 1982. A different organism, at a site 4,300 miles distant, centuries removed in archaeological context, presenting the same foundational structural principle. Both entities have centers, rather than axes. Both present limb counts and arrangements absent from every vertebrate lineage in the complete fossil record. What the two sites establish together is not two anomalous specimens. It is a body plan, a documented category of organism organized on radial rather than bilateral principles, with physical representatives in the archaeological record on two continents. Belzoni resealed the false wall before leaving KV-17 and disclosed nothing of the inner room to the Egyptian authorities who had issued his operating permit. He transported the being to England with artifacts shipped through Alexandria in November 1817. The British Museum acquired portions of his collection through the bank's estate in the 1850s. The acquisition records for that transfer are incomplete in every public-facing catalog the museum maintains. In 2003, a British Museum internal inventory of non-public storage sections, produced as a routine cataloging exercise, was leaked to Dr. Helen Baines of the University College London Institute of Archaeology by a museum employee who has not been publicly identified. The inventory covers storage section NP7 inaccessible to external scholars under any existing research access agreement. A single line item describes an organic specimen, origin uncertain, Valley of the Kings, Banks Collection, 19th century acquisition, with dimensions consistent with Belzoni's 16-foot measurement and a notation specifying climate-controlled storage. Dr. Baines disclosed the leaked inventory at the University of Cambridge's annual Egyptology Symposium in September 2003. Her institutional access to British Museum research facilities was revoked in January 2004. The revocation notice cited administrative grounds. The Egyptian government submitted 3 formal diplomatic communications to the British Museum requesting the return of what Egyptian authorities describe as a specific large organic artifact removed from KV-17 in 1817. The requests are dated 1998, 2007, and 2019. The 2019 communication was also forwarded to the United Kingdom Foreign and Commonwealth Office, which acknowledged receipt and referred it to the museum. Patricia Usick's 1974 discovery is documented in a single footnote in a 1976 British Museum Internal Bulletin not accessible to external researchers. Usick died in 2015. Her research files passed to the museum's archive, where they remain unavailable under any current access policy. As of 2026, no public record establishes what occupies storage section NP7. No research access to that section has been granted, and 3 formal diplomatic requests spanning nearly 3 decades have produced no public response. The British Museum has not denied it. Across 10 sites on 6 continents, from 1533 to 2013, military and institutional authorities sealed physical evidence of biologically impossible remains within days or weeks of discovery, not through coincidence or bureaucratic routine, but through a coordinated application of classification authority that has, in every case, held for decades. In each location, what was found shares a single characteristic that no terrestrial evolutionary process has produced: a body plan, a biochemistry, or a material composition with no origin in Earth's biosphere. If you watch this all the way through, subscribe, there is more coming, and this is the channel for it. Hit the like button, it matters more than it should, algorithmically. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? The comments on these videos come from everywhere, and I read them. If something in this one stayed with you, say which one.